To start, I want to tell y'all that y'all can delete the bullet on your Chapter 25 outline that talks about or says the effects of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to start today with the crisis over Berlin. By the early 60s, Berlin had really become a city of great strife and turmoil. It had been over 15 years since the city was initially divided into zones. It had been over 10 years since the Berlin airlift, and within this period of time since then, millions of East Germans had fled into West Berlin because it was free from communist rule. And so again, people from the Germans on the East communist side are fleeing into the West side, specifically into West Berlin, because it's kind of this safe haven within the communist, empire. This is kind of a big deal because obviously it doesn't make East Germany look good. It doesn't make the communist side look very good, and it looks like they're losing, but also it hurts their economy. And you have people fleeing, that isn't good for the business within your own country. So in order to prevent future East Germans from escaping in large numbers, it's actually Nikita Khrushchev who begins this plan to start constructing the Berlin Wall. It would be a concrete wall topped with barbed wire that essentially divided the city of Berlin in half. This wall is highly effective in reducing the number of people fleeing East Germany into the democratic West Berlin. But it also became kind of a symbol of oppression, and it would for several decades, which is why it's going to be a big deal when it eventually comes down. So searching for ways to ease tension is the next bullet you have. All of these various showdowns between Kennedy and Khrushchev, it just makes the whole world aware of how close we are to potentially having peace or war, all-out war between these two countries and their allies. And Kennedy really wants to kind of ease tensions within the relationship between us and the Soviet Union. Towards the end of his presidential tenure, he will announce that the two nations had established a hotline, kind of like a direct phone line, between the White House government and the Kremlin. You may have heard of that phrase before, the Kremlin. That refers to the Soviet government. This hotline, this direct phone line, basically leaves the communication door open at all times, and so the two countries and their governments can kind of talk things out to avoid future crises. And then the two later will agree to what's called a limited test ban treaty. The type of testing we're referring to is weapons tests, and so this limited test ban treaty prohibited nuclear testing in the atmosphere. I want to end today with a few things in Kennedy's presidency that aren't directly associated with the Cold War in the Soviet Union, and it's the New Frontier. The New Frontier kind of refers to Kennedy's domestic policy. Kennedy wanted to provide medical care for the elderly. He wanted to rebuild areas in America that were underdeveloped. He wanted to also help in the education sector. And unfortunately, his New Frontier program did not officially, his little stimulus program did not officially pass through Congress. People say that the reason Kennedy couldn't get these things off the ground were because he lacked what's known as popular mandate. You could probably dissect the meaning of that if you tried. When you have like a popular vote, talking about the people's support, popular mandates would refer to like an indication that voters and the American public approve of Kennedy and what he stands for, and thus Congress would vote in favor of his, program, since the people are behind it, of the country, a true democracy. But because he had won the overall presidential election with a small margin, they think that just shows that the American public necessarily isn't all in for him. So it's going to be kind of hard for him to get any true reform measures passed. So, in the early 60s, there was a small recession in the economy, and Kennedy is going to look for ways to deal with this, and he's going to, unfortunately, turn to deficit spending, as FDR was kind of forced to do, which means that we're going to be increasing our government spending to kind of put money into the economy in various sectors, creating jobs. I'll talk about that, but it does put our government's economy further into debt. He increased our military budget, and this would hire more soldiers, but also have more weapons created, and if more weapons are needing to be created, then more people are having to build those weapons, and so he's paying for people to build them. And he also raised minimum wage and provided further unemployment opportunities. And so these are just some examples of deficit spending in our economy, because we are increasing our spending into the economy, but our government really can't afford that increase. He is going to address issues on a global level in two different ways. He is going to create the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps would be a program of volunteer assistance to developing nations in other continents, in other regions. The Peace Corps was a huge success and definitely one of Kennedy's legacies. People would work as, agricultural advisors or teachers or healthcare workers, whatever kind of work that whatever country needed, they would provide that aid. And, by the end of the decade, you had thousands and thousands of volunteers serving through the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps is still in existence today. The second thing that he creates is called the Alliance for Progress. This is very similar to kind of the Peace Corps, but it's specifically targeting Latin American countries, so countries just below us in our region. It offered economic and technical assistance to Latin American countries, and really there's kind of an underlying goal here, because we want to prevent any other country from falling and picking up what's happening in Cuba, where when the economy's low, shifting to communism, we want to prevent that pattern. The last thing we're going to talk about is the race to the moon. So early on in Kennedy's presidency, the Soviets had successfully sent a human into space. His name was Yuri Gagarin. Soviet Yuri Gagarin, first human into space. And of course, we don't like being behind the path here, and we don't like being second best. So he kind of sees this as a challenge, and he makes this grand announcement that we are going to work on putting a man on the moon. By the end of the decade, we would successfully land a man, Neil Armstrong, on the moon. Of course, we all know his famous quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Unfortunately, Kennedy would not see this event take place after his initial efforts, and we will talk about why that is in class on Tuesday. I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend. Please write down any questions you have, and I'll see you all Tuesday.